Hi, everybody. I'm back on Dive Talk Plus, and I'm really excited. I'm always excited about our interviews. I have Henry Castellanos. Did I say that
Yeah,
right?
Castellanos. Castellanos, I guess, a few more, you want to say it more Latino, but yeah.
I do. I'm trying to pick up on my lingo. Anyway,
Yeah.
so Henry is a good friend and also is a super deep technical diver, and he's going to explain what I mean by super deep. I'm going to read a little bit of his bio, but I'm more interested in bringing out of this interview, which I think is super fascinating, and I know I'm going to learn a lot. There's a almost like a different level of learning, vocabulary, tools, considerations, planning between deep dive at a recreational level. And let's call that, Henry, for people that can go to 130 feet, which is pretty deep. There's a deep dive certification to then there's an entirely different level of sort of considerations to go to 100 meters, which very few people in the world have seen. We may have, it's not a lot. There's even more considerations, which I don't even know about. You've done a lot of special training and diving in this area. When you're going to like 150 meters or 400 feet or 500 feet, that is even beyond what we may be thinking about at 100 meters. It's very interesting because very few people in the world have done that. Your journey is really pretty cool because you started in the underwater dive world and only in 2015. And I've
Yeah.
watched you surge. And you'll talk about that. I know you started that in a really cool place, the world's largest aquarium in Dubai. And then in 2022, you kind of said, I want to take a turn. Something triggered you, and I think it was that World War II wreck in Honolulu. And that's
Yes.
something else I'm going to want you to talk about after I get through with this interview. The whys behind going deep. The why. What is it? What do you need to, why do you want to do that? And then I know you're certified. It may even be more than six rebreathers now. I don't know, but it's a lot. It's at least six, could be more. And I know that you are a technical trimix instructor for us for Dive Talk. That's great on our unit on the go. And I want you to talk about the rebreathers and why you use one versus another in a way
Mhm.
people will understand. I know you teach for INTD and TDI. I know you've conducted a number of dive nails exceeding 400 feet in depth. There may be more astronauts in the world than people that are doing this. That's how kind of big time that is. And you're starting, and I'm watching your Facebook all the time to uncover some of the most remarkable sites in the world and wrecks in the world that are really deep. Pretty cool. So you bring this unique level of discipline, and it's happened quickly, which I think is also interesting. And your career as a full time commercial pilot and instructor of other pilots, and this is for jets and test pilot, probably has a lot of overlap of what just got you so into diving and so fascinated, and you're so into the technical aspects. You've done
Yes.
some self-teaching of like dual rebreathers and stuff like that. That could be controversial, but we're going to talk about it. That's what we do on Dive Talk. And I want you to talk about all of that. So, with all this decades of teaching experience and ratings on 15 different aircrafts, man, it's pretty interesting that you're super technical and that you've surged to this level. So how, first of all, just right off the bat, you tell us, how do you think that your aviation experience has influenced now your approach into this rapid
Yeah.
increase into technical diving, deep diving?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started flying back in 1996, so quite a long time ago. I started teaching about 2 or 3 years after I started to learn how to fly, and I've been teaching aviation for many years. Got into the commercial side, and I look at technical diving and diving in general, not just technical diving, because I take it very seriously. I mean, even though it's a hobby now, and on the technical side, I even take it much more serious. Um, there aviation and diving, there's a lot of science behind both of them. There's a lot of preparation behind both of them. Just like there is in diving. In flying, there are, when you're flying an airplane, that's the actual portion of it, just like when I'm doing a dive. But before every flight, especially if I'm doing something major, like I'm going to be flying a next in about a month, about 2 or 3 weeks when I get back from the Britannic. I'm doing a very large trip. I'm going from Palm Beach to Dubai during wartime. So there's a lot of stuff that I got to plan then. From there, I'm going over to Indonesia, and then from after Indonesia, heading to the Monaco for the Grand Prix. So I'm flying all over the world. So stuff like this, we have to plan weeks in advance, just like I would do a dive, and then I have to execute it. So I look at it, and I do my dives just like I plan my flying. I look at every aspect. I look at what I specifically need for this specific dive or flight, and then I look at what risks do I have, and I use, believe it or not, I've spent once I started technical diving and getting into more of the deeper stuff, and when I mean deeper, I'm talking about 250, 300, 400 feet. I actually spent a very large amount of money with my IT people to use something called SMS, a safety management system, which and risk management system that we use for flying. And I actually kind of integrated that into diving. So a lot of the parameters we changed from flying to diving, and I actually plug in a lot of the information, everything that I know about the dive site, depths, weather conditions into this, and it generates a risk analysis on what possibly issues can go wrong, and it gives me a number. That number at that point, I mitigate the risk. So if it says that currents can be very very strong on this wreck, and it gives it a number five, for example, for me to successfully do the dive, I have to bring it below a two. So what am I going to do to do that? So it sounds fairly complicated, and it probably never has been used in diving before. But like I said, I'm trying to incorporate this from aviation because for me, I think a lot of the stuff that we've done in aviation, it's just like technical diving. And a lot of the stuff that we learned in aviation, we learned that they actually say it. It's something that they say that it's written in blood. And the same way that technical diving is, people learn from, unfortunately, people dying, exactly like aviation was back in the 1940s and 1950s. So I use those tools to help me plan and to try to develop things. Now, am I looking to market this or sell this later? Not really. I think it's I don't think people would. I don't think it's commercial enough that anybody would actually spend the kind of money that these systems cost. But again, I'm paying for it already for aviation, so I just kind of went a step further in using it for my needs now. So
What do you think is more deadly? This deep diving, and you can define when you think maybe that overlaps as
mhm.
being more deadly than flying. Which one's severely, significantly more deadly, risky?
Well, just like diving, there's a lot of aspects of flying. I mean, you touched on just a small portion of what I did commercially. I also was, I always say in my other life, quote unquote, I was a federal agent for the Department of Homeland Security, and so I was a part of that. Aside from being a federal agent, I was in a drug interdiction and counterterrorism task force, which led me into flying a lot of military type airplanes. I was and helicopters. I was a Black Hawk pilot and stuff like that. So that kind of flying is a lot more risky than commercial flying. Commercial flying is the safest transportation known to man, right? Not when I'm flying a Black Hawk at 50 feet above the water chasing a drug boat, and we're shooting at each other, right? So that's kind of the thing. I could compare. I can tell you that for me, I think that technical diving, deep technical diving, gets very dangerous. Probably once you get past the 400 foot, 450 foot, definitely when you start getting into the 500, 600, 700 foot, it doesn't just, it's not linear, it's exponential. And a lot of it is because it's not, it really hasn't been studied. And you really don't know what you don't know, right? So that's kind of what it is.
And when you're doing those kind of dives where you're in the unknown, I was hoping you would go there because I agree. I don't think we know very much. What what drives you to do that? What does your family think? What does your wife think? And what kind of sort of both stigma and feedback are you getting from the dive community of those that are kind of in the know versus those that are very in the know? Because it could be very interesting that you may actually be getting encouragement from those very in the know versus those kind of that think they're in the know are, I know, can be critical in a way that may or may not be justified. So to summarize my question, because I said a lot there, why are you doing these super, super deep dives that are in the unknown?
So one of the driving factors for me is not the deep diving. A lot of the driving factors for me is I'm a very passionate wreck diver. I love wrecks, and I don't, for the most part, I don't do deep dives for just deep diving to set records or to try to set records or to just try to push deeper. Just like other people that I've spoken to that have been mentors of mine and that have been people that have guided me throughout this deep diving journey that do extreme deep cave diving, for example, that's their passion and they want to push further and go further down into the caves and go further in. To me, I do deep diving to reach something, and that's something are wrecks. I have done deep at the, I wouldn't say at the beginning, but during testing of equipment and so forth, I have done deep diving just to do deep diving. That's mostly to test equipment, because and I would say in a it's a controlled environment as you can get at 400 feet. But I do that kind of diving to test equipment and so forth. But when I'm actually doing specific diving, give you an example, when I did in March, for example, when I went down to 100 and almost 160 meters or 520 feet or so, actually I was at that. I stopped not at 520 feet. I was supposed to be getting to 600 feet. We were heading to a wreck called the Yolanda, which is in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, and that wreck starts at 580 feet and it pretty much ends about the 630 range. So we were going there. That's what the plan was to go there. Unfortunately, due to some stuff that happened and issues, I decided to call the dive and we turned around. And we ended up going back, but that's kind of that was the last deep dive that I did. Again, I'm not diving just to go hit a depth and come back. I'm going there to explore, to see what's there in these wrecks that I'm going to. Like right today, I mean, we didn't do an extremely deep dive, but I dove on a World War I ocean, massive ocean liner the size of the Titanic. That's called the Burdigala. The boat's down in 230, 250 foot range in the Kia Channel. Very difficult dive to go to, and it's a boat that struck a landmine, actually sunk by the same submarine that sunk the Britannic in that same channel within, I believe, a week of each other. So that's that's the history that I follow. I love the history. I love to study the wrecks before I go down there. I want to know what's on there. We you study where things are. Like we found one of the two bells that were on the Burdigala. We found different lamps that were there, stuff like this. So that's what drives me, and it's not really the depth. The depth kind of comes because you're going to find a specific thing. So
Yeah, and that makes sense. But let me ask you this. Help us as we sort of continue to set up this interview. What what are the differences? What are the difference in consideration and training associated with a one I'll make it simple. A 130-foot dive versus a 100-meter dive versus a dive to 500 feet or below, like the 600-foot one you were going to do. what, just set us up. Like, well, okay, if I can dive to 130 feet, can I go to
Yeah.
100 meters with the same
So,
training?
yeah, so I'll actually explain to you the way I explain on day one of, for example, a rebreather class. With a brand new rebreather diver that always been diving recreational depths, prior to 130 feet. And I put it this way: I'm very blunt when I talk about this because um, it's important they people know what they're getting into, right? So the way I separate it is we have scuba diving is separated into recreational diving and it's separated into technical diving. The big change between that, and this is something that I like to explain to new students, is that when you're recreational diving, if something happens, your option is to get out of the water now. And we can do that. You might be at 130 feet, which is the deepest you can go recreationally, or you can be at 60 feet. But you can get out of the water now, and chances are you're probably not going to get hurt, depending upon how healthy you are, or the condition you're in, or whatever's going on that day in your life. You should be fairly okay to just get out of the water if you have enough air and you follow procedures that you learn recreationally. The line is drawn the minute that we cross something called NDL, non-decompression limit, right? That's where to me, the line is drawn. Once you cross this imaginary line, now we are in something called decompression, right? When we require to do something to get out of the water, right? And that something is time in the water to get rid of the nitrogen that's in your blood. Because again, um, I look at it like this. Every dive that we do, whether we're doing a 20-foot dive or a 30-foot dive on a reef or a 300-foot dive, it's a decompression dive because the minute you get in the water, you are on gassing and you're getting nitrogen build up in your blood. There is a line where at this point, we can't just get out. We have to go and stay longer in the water to get the nitrogen you breathed in to get out of the water safely. So what I explain to them is the minute you decide to be a technical diver and go to decompression, you no longer can get out of the water. And now you are left with two options. Very simple. One option is the best option is if you get out of the water now and you're in decompression, is you're going to get bent. That's your best option. The number two option, the worst that can happen is you die. There is no other options at that point. You're not you don't have. There's obviously varying grades of this, but your best option is you're going to be bent if you leave the water and you have decompression to do. So because of that, I try to explain that it's very important that you do certain things. Again, carrying back to aviation, and I explain this to my students, that you might not do recreationally. A lot of people go, for example, buy scuba gear, and the manufacturer says you should do service every year. You should rinse the gear after being in salt water. You should do this, do that. And honestly, a lot of people I think are very laxed about this, in terms of how they maintain their gear. You can see this in various different forms of rental gear. You can see in various different forms of the way people treat their own gear. But when you go to technical diving, I try to emphasize that this gear is just what's going to aid you to finish decompression. And if this gear fails, you're left to these two options. You get bent or you die. So that is the number one thing that I like to look at when I'm planning. Obviously, gear maintenance, right? I have a very strict maintenance protocol when I'm on my technical gear. Now, I personally don't separate at this point. I do not separate my recreational gear with my technical gear. I maintain it per the manufacturer minimum or more. And I can get into the more when we start getting into this questions you ask about the deep 500-foot, 600-foot dives. So that's a minimum. I maintain my gear meticulously to at least manufacturer specs or more. Number two, what I do when I start getting into this decompression zone is that I call it. I have a little acronym that I go. Everybody knows in the scuba industry says, plan your dive and dive your plan. I kind of add a third step, and when the way I teach it, I says it's PPE, right? We plan the dive, we practice the dive, and then we execute it. And that's the way I do it. why don't I just plan my dive and dive my plan? Because I have to make sure that my preparation or my practice of my emergency procedures for that dive, because I can't just assume that everything is going to go well. I cannot. I don't plan. I don't plan for the best, and I do not do that ever. I plan for the worst, and I hope that then it's going to go the best. So on a dive, for example, give you an example for the 500 or 600 foot dive that I was planning. I planned to dive months and months in advance. It was over 6, 7 months before prior to the dive that I started planning on what I was going to do, picking all the stuff that goes with that, and we can get into that more later. But after I got the plan and I went through it, I practiced the different scenarios of bailout in a lake that I go to, and that my students have kind of coined a frame. They call it the lake of torture, because that's where I do a lot of my training, and we go through all these skills. I spend a lot of time there by myself. I go practice drills over and over again to make sure that um, it's muscle memory. And why do I do that? It's because that's what we do in aviation. Aviation, again, being the safest form of flying, at the same time, the reason it's the safest form of flying, it's because of the preparation that I do. Me as a captain, I have to do a simulator and ground training every 6 months. And what that entails is I have to go through all the aircraft systems every 6 months, and I have to do all the aircraft emergencies every 6 months. I have to go through engine fire, failure, rapid decompressions, emergency failures, hydraulic issues, medical emergencies. All this stuff is done every 6 months. And we practice engines blowing up, fires being on the airplane, practicing flying on one engine. We do this. Well, I apply the same thing to diving. The reason aviation does this is because one of the biggest things that it's made aviation safe the way it is now. It's the study of human factors that they go with, right? They study human factors, and there's masters. I have one of my master's degrees is in aviation human factors, and that just is broken up into so many things. One of them says is emergency planning. When an emergency happens, right, we as people physiologically go into our fight or flight mechanism. And when you go into the fight or flight mechanism, we revert back to what we consider crude muscle memory. And that crude muscle memory isn't the fine dexterity of, what's it called? 9 times 9 is 81. And if I divide that by this and I do that, no, we revert back to basic principles. And those basic principles need to be ingrained in your head. And that's why we practice so much. Well, the same thing I go do for technical diving, right? And one of the things that I teach during, not only for the technical side, but the recreational side, is everybody's got a different way of setting up gear. I'm not telling you that my way is the best. It works for me. This is how it works for me. But do what works for you and do it every single time. I can tell you that if I have a bolt snap here, that bolt snap is there every single dive. The way I put on my, give you an example, the way I put on my go, right? And I talk this to my students. You get dressed exactly the way you do it. I train them the same way. You put the top bolt steps on, then the bottoms. After that, you plug in this, you do that. And I harp on them, and I believe it, I get on pretty hard when they do it out of order. Why? Because the day that something happens, you're going to revert back to this muscle memory that, okay, I put these bolt snaps first, the bottoms was next, then I plug in my dill, then I put on, the last thing I do is put on my computer, and I check my bailout regulator. If you do that, and I have them get undressed the same way, in reverse. So the reason I do this is so you can ingrain in your head, so I can not even think about this over and over again. So I know that if anything happens, my regulator's here. That's the reason I do, and I do it because of aviation. The same way. I can literally. I'm right now currently. I'm a captain on I'm on a 777 and on a 737, and I can literally get inside the cockpit, pitch black, and I could literally touch every single switch and tell you this switch is a battery switch. These are my fuel pumps. And I can do that with my eyes closed. So I want to do the same way with my dive gear. right? I know that on this D ring up here, I have my GoPro. On this D ring here, I have, what's it called, my regulator. On my bottom D ring, on this pocket, I have this. This pocket, I have that, and I never changed it. I never do. Um, and when somebody gets me out of kilter, things I stop. Just like in aviation, we have checklists, and I have checklists for everything. We normally, if we have a checklist, nobody interrupts us when we're doing our checklist. And you flew with me on the airplane in what's it called once in the jump seat, and you saw we have a checklist. Well, during that time, nobody interrupts a checklist. If somebody interrupts a checklist, we stop the checklist, go back 4 items, and start over again. Well, I do the same thing when I'm teaching, right? Especially when I'm doing rebreather class. At the beginning, I will show them this is how we do the checklist, and then I show them what I consider, just like in aviation, memory items that we go over. And these are the memory items you have to put to memory. And this is what you do in this order. And I let them do this on their own. Towards dive two, day two, day three, they're doing it on their own. But guess what I'm doing? I start conversations. Oh, you know what? What'd you do last night? What did you eat? What's going on? And then I let them screw up. And when we get on the boat and they forget something, get what I do? I get on them. I'm like, I don't care if I'm your instructor. You look at me and tell me, shut up. I'm busy right
That's
now doing
awesome.
something. I'm
Love
busy
that.
doing something right now. That's exactly how I teach them. I don't, because there's going to be friends, there's going to be people talking to you. There's going to be fights with girlfriends, fights with boyfriends, fights with spouses. In the morning, you had some road rage. Stuff like this is what messes up your mental stuff and affects you while you're diving. Now, this is important, right? You're not on your A game. And when you're not on your A game, you can't think, you forget stuff. So the only way you can go back to doing this is to go back to get crude memory items and elementary stuff that you learned at the beginning. So that's kind of the way I do stuff. The deeper I go, the more complex that is. The more complex my planning process, the more complex my gear is. When I was doing the 600-foot dive or the 500-foot dive that I ended up aborting, I'm on dual CCR, multiple cylinders, DPVs, flashlights, cameras, all kinds of stuff. So the more complex it gets, the more things that I need to make sure that I'm practicing, right? So, and what do I mean by that? Give you an example. If I'm diving and I have a DPV and I have a GoPro, and I always keep my GoPro in the same hand. If you look at all my pictures or stuff that I post, my lights are always on a certain hand and my GoPro is always another hand. Why? Because that's what I'm used to holding. That way, in case something happens, I know that I'm gonna grab my GoPro from this hand, clip it on here, and then I'm gonna have this hand free. And then I always clip stuff on this side. And that's kind of what I go and do. And I practice that over and over again so I don't have to think about it. So that's my basic planning process just of practice. And then the execution portion of it, believe it or not, that's the easy part, right? The only variable that ends up affecting your execution is weather. Honestly, that's it. It's weather. Everything else you did prior to over and over again. So now you jump in the water and you try to do the plan that you did. And if something goes wrong, you do you practice the emergency stuff that you practiced while you were doing it in 60-foot bad visibility lake. So that's kind of what I do. And our students practice the same thing. They do that. I do not get out of the lake with my students until they have finished and done all their skills to the standard, whether it's INTD, TDI, or dive talk standards, until they've met the standards of everything, all their actual bailout procedures, their emergencies, and so forth. We don't leave there. We don't go in the water. The boat is the easy dives. I have little tricks and stuff to try to test them of the stuff that they did in the thing, but the boat's easy. Once we get in the water in the boat, you've already pretty much proven to me that you can handle this equipment on your own. We do not leave the lake. Some people do it in the 6 hours that I spend in there, usually, or the 2 3 hour sessions that I do in there, or we might be there 2 or 3 days. It is what it's going to be, right? Just as important that I push this is how you need to do it because of safety. I feel responsible that if I sign them off, that they're going to be capable to save their own life. So I, I want to feel comfortable, just like if it was my life, that they know how to save theirs. Can't rely on anybody else, right? So that's kind of where I go.
Those procedures, this doing it the same, practicing, building up to it are definitely potentially going to save your life. But what I'm wanting to ask you about is who teaches you or a student that wants to be you and go with you how to do the dives that are outside of any structured courses that I know of that are available. In other words, right now, I believe you could take a course to typically, like they say, 100 meters. This is known as a hypoxic or trimix class. You could talk a little bit about what does hypoxic even mean? What does trimix mean? What are the considerations? There's bent, there's being in, there's being narked, there's gas density issues. But when you go beyond that, things that you're doing now, which are deeper, dual rebreather, all of these other things, who is teaching you
Well,
those
that
items?
yeah.
Because, and the reason I'm asking you who's teaching you is because let's say, Henry, I want to go with you. So I want you to teach me. What are we, where do we go now to get to that point?
So unlike, and I keep I not I know a lot of people again. I've gotten kind of like a little bit of pushback, in the social media aspect by many divers that I always
I
revert
get it
back
every
to.
day.
Yeah, I revert back to aviation a lot. They're like, oh, aviation, diving is not aviation. Okay, it is. It's a highly technical skill, and technical diving is a highly technical skill. Why, and I said this the other day actually to Doug Ebersol, one of my mentors. I said, why am I going to try to reinvent the wheel, you know, if something has been invented already, and it doesn't matter how many times you look at it, it's still going to be round, and round is still going to work the best, you know. So what do we do from that? I go back to aviation because people have died, people have done things in that realm, and they've pioneered and explored that realm. So I bring it to here. There is a limit, right? And that limit, for example, is mod 3 or hypoxic, right? 100-meter depth, and that's pretty much what it kind of, in all general purposes, everything kind of stops. 330 feet, and then after that, you can go. If you want to go deeper, you go deeper on your own. That's all on yourself. Who teaches you that? I'll go back to this. When I'm training a new captain, and I do this a lot. I was a something called a training checking evaluator, which is a kind of like the same thing what an IT is in diving, right? I actually was but the only thing different is that I was represented the FAA. They don't, so for example, if I was at a Boeing facility and I represented the FAA and I actually gave out FAA licenses. So I was an evaluator on almost all the Boeing aircraft and Bombardier airplanes. And when I'm looking at a new captain, if flying, it's just kind of an oxymoron. If you cannot fly this two pilot airplane by yourself, which kind of is like, why would you want to do that? If you're not capable of flying this thing by yourself, you should not be a captain. Why? Because as a captain, it has nothing to do with flying. Captains have to worry about paperwork, planning, preparation. The flying aspect's easy. That's what co-pilots do. That's what you're learning.
Mm.
Diving is the same way. I was taught, right? You're quote unquote, you can be taught to dive to 100 meters. You can be taught to dive with one CCR. And this is actually a kind of a conversation that I had just recently with Luis, the president owner of INTD, and then also with Joe Deturi, which is another mentor of mine. And they said, yeah, there's dual CCR courses out there. There are. But if you need to honestly take a course and ask how to dive dual CCR, you shouldn't be doing it. That's something that they said. You should not be doing it. You know, you go there to learn from the people that are doing DLC, but if you can't, if you're going there expecting to, hey, this is how you dive dual CCR, that's you should not be diving dual CCR.
Interesting.
You should know already that how these two CCRs you're going to use, how they are affected, whether you're breathing on them or breathing off of them. So that's how I started. I went when I decided to go through this dual CCR journey. We'll get into that just briefly. I literally went and talked to everybody that I could that I knew dove dual CCR, and some people spoke to me fairly quickly. Other people didn't want to talk to me at all. Some people spent hours and days and said, hey, call me anytime. And when I mean I talked to everybody, I spoke into the probably the most notable people in the industry. I spoke, like I said, I spoke to Richard Harris. I spoke to Andy Pickton. I spoke to what's it called, several people up in Cave Country, that are working up there that have been diving, with the NSDS and all these people exploring that have been diving 15, 16-hour decompression dives with stage CCRs. And I learned, I wanted to know, I'm like, hey, and I didn't ask them how to dive it. I already knew what I wanted to do. What I asked them was, what is your challenge? What do you see that you find the biggest problem that you encounter diving dual CCR? And funny to say, each one of them had something different. What's it called? Andrew Pitkin said something else. Richard Harris said something else. When I was talking to, other, what's it called? Joe DeTuri, he said something else. Each one of them had their thing. So what I did is that I went and compiled this all into, like a kind of like a table. And I'm like, okay, this person says that, bailout down here is a problem. This other person says that we have to worry about BOVs are here. This person says, and I'm like, you know what? Well, how do I fix all these problems? So I started thinking, what can I do to the system that I decided to use to fix the problems that these people encountered? Why do I need to go encounter the same problem that these people did? They already encountered the problem. They found the problem. They're having issues with it. I don't need to go. I don't, like I said, the go hitting your head on the wall when your parents told you that, hey, don't do this, and you do it anyway, and the same thing happens. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to learn from what these people learned over the years and decades of diving CCRs and home built CCRs and doing these systems to learn of, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to fix their problem if they still have it and maybe make it a little better. That's kind of how I approach this. And I kind of taught myself and learned, I would say, I want to say learn the hard way, but I learned what doesn't work. Because I, in my way of thinking for dual CCR, and I say mine because I've done videos and a lot of people have, said otherwise. I believe that a dual CCR setup, it's just like wearing a custom dry suit. It's got to be built for you. It's got to fit you well. It's got to work for you. What works for Ed Sorensen, for example, might not work for me. I might not like to dive this way. What works for Richard Harris might work amazing for him, but it's in my I'm not diving caves like he is. I'm diving Rex. Well, who's diving Rex dual CCR? Well, let me talk to some people that are doing that. I spoke to a lot of people in Italy. In Europe, a lot of people do that, and I spoke to some people there, and that's kind of where I went, and I tailored myself to a system that works for me. I didn't go out and I always say it as a joke on social media. Oh, I'm certified and I own over 10 CCRs and I'm certified on all these. I didn't do that just because. I didn't go spend this kind of money because you could imagine the amount of money that I spent on rebreathers. I didn't do that for a reason. If I could have bought two rebreathers that worked incredible from the beginning, I would have stopped. But they didn't. I found problems with each one of them, and I'm like, okay, that's not working. Let me go see what else. So, and I kept doing that, and again, this is something that I want to be very specific. Before I even attempted to dive in dual CCR, I got very proficient at diving that specific rebreather. I dove the Dive Talk Go. very, very, like for hundreds of hours learning that rebreather. That's one of my dual CCR rebreathers that I used for a long time. Then I decided to go with the Revo. I dove the Revo for a very, very long time, and so forth. So each one, I knew its ins and outs. I knew that if I add, I knew how, little nuances. For example, if I press the button this long, this is what's going to happen to my gas, and that's how intricate detail you need to be intimate with the equipment you have, and that's what I do. And I do spend a lot of time diving. You could ask anybody that knows me personally. I dive religiously 3 to 4 times a week in the ocean, boat wise. And then when I'm not diving, if I can't go diving, I'm in the lake. And especially before a dive, before a big dive, I'm diving and I'm practicing and I'm making sure not only everything works, but that I work. Because I'm the weakest. Honestly, I think I'm the weakest link. People diving rebreathers in the early 2000s, just like aviation in the 1940s, planes used to break, rebreathers used to break, and the human was not the weakest link. Now, rebreathers are made very robust. Electronics are better. Solenoids are better. The all the what's it called? The oxygen sensors are better. Just wiring is better. So rebreathers aren't breaking. The people are. So that's kind of what I do, and I spend a lot of time in the water. I just go in there and practice over and over again, different things. I work on my buoyancy, work on my kicking, work on all kinds of stuff. Just try to stay better. I'm not trying to be the best at anything. I'm just trying to be the best for myself, right? Because every time I get in the water, I want to get out. I have loved ones, I have kids, I have family. I want to get out of the water safely, and I'm going to learn and do everything possible to make that happen. That's kind of what I do.
Boy, you said so much there, and it's really awesome. I think what I love is that you are explaining just how much detailed and training and proficiency you are requiring on yourself to allow yourself to even consider going on. Let's just face it, can be very deadly dives when you're going below 400 and 500 feet. There's not a lot of room for
No.
error.
Mhm.
So one of the things that you did say is you gathered information from these different experts and you fixed some things.
Yes.
What did you fix in the dual rebreather uh, world that you now
So,
feel is working well for you, and on which two
yeah,
rebreathers is it working well? I'm really curious. I bet a
yeah,
lot of people are
yeah.
curious about that.
So this is something again, just like diving and rebreather. There's people that love MCCRs. You know, good friends of ours. Mike Young, Ed Sorensen. People that are diving that have been diving the Kiss products. The reason I say Kiss products is because that is probably worldwide. They're known as leading MCCRs on the market. They dive and they love that type of system. And chances are, that they don't like the electronic CCRs, right? And then we actually today at dinner with Gregory Bordansky, he's an inventor and the owner of Scubatron and GBM. We were having conversation with our George Borgueno and then Dominic Robinson, Deep Wreck Diver on YouTube. We were having conversation about the MCCR and ECCR, and in Europe, everybody loves ECCRs, right? And everyone has their whys and why nots. I going back to aviation again. I can tell you this: I'm I'm gifted in flying. I am an extremely, extremely good pilot, and I'm not talking big about myself. I'm in the industry, in aviation industry. I'm very, very well known. I'm very well respected, and I am I'm an excellent pilot. It's something that some people are natural at. Some people are natural piano players. I am a natural pilot. And I used to do this. I used to say this a lot. When because at the beginning before I started commercial, I used to do maintenance test flights and also I did aircraft repossessions and I used to do a lot of different flying. And I was like, as long as I can start the engine, I can fly it. And that's kind of one of the things I used to say.
I believe
And
that.
yeah, so I'm an excellent pilot. I know that. And it doesn't matter what it is. If and a lot of people, my parents and and my what's it called, my kids and everything else that have been around me for a very long time, my partners and everything, they know that God forbid something ever happens, and if I end up dying on an airplane, that airplane was unflyable. I do test I do test dives for excuse me, test flights. I'm sorry about this. I gotta interrupted there for a second. I do test flights when accidents happen. I get called by the simulator facilities to do accident reproductions and do test flights. I've done several of them, right? So if this person ends up crashing, there's like they call them up and it's like, hey, can you come and fly this profile and see what happens? See if you live. They don't tell me what's going on. They say, hey, this is your conditions. Go fly the airplane, and I do this. And at times, I end up pretty much not crashing when this pilot just killed X amount of people on board. Why? Because I think differently in the way they are. Well, going back to the diving thing, I like to monitor. I can fly an airplane, but coming back to human factors, I can monitor and take a lot of the task loading off myself a lot better than just doing everything. And what do I mean by that? It doesn't matter how good I can fly. I will never be able to be as accurate and as efficient as an autopilot. Never. I'm never going to be able to maintain altitude that precise. I will never be able to maintain airspeed that precise as an autopilot. Well, I look at an ECCR or the way I dive dual CCR in that way. One of the challenges that exists in dual CCR diving is one CCR I am breathing on, and the other CCR I'm not. It's in a standby mode, right? I'm not on the loop and I'm not breathing in. So that's a problem, right? Because rebreathers are meant to be dove. So if I'm descending, a lot of things happen. People for the non-divers, as you go down in depth, two things happen, right? The molecules of air, everything starts to get bigger, right? So, for example, oxygen that's inside of your gas increases in something called PO2, the partial pressure. So the amount of oxygen increases, right, as you go down in depth. But at the same time, like air pockets, like your that use air, like your BCD, your counter lungs, your dry suit, the air compresses down and gets smaller. So I have to keep adding, right? So the same thing happens on the dual rebreather. If you're on the rebreather, no big deal. I know what's going on and I can add diluent or I can add O2 or I can add whatever I need to maintain something. Well, what about the rebreather that I'm not on? What's that happen? And a lot of people diving dual CCR again will switch back and forth the loops to maintain this as they're going down in depth. I looked at that and I'm like, I don't like that at all. In a cave, I think it's easy because you're going down a cave and there's it's a semi-controlled environment. You don't have current. You can have flow, but you're not descending in blue water down to 600 feet, and you're dropping 30 to 60 feet a minute, right? So you're switching back and forth and non-DPV and all this kind of stuff. So I'm like, that's not going to work. What I want to do is I want to take this task loading off of myself. So I need to figure out how to make my standby rebreather do this on its own. So that's kind of what I ended up doing, and I modified rebreathers. You're right. My dual CCR
So is that
systems
is
for
that the big thing that you would say that you fixed before
yes,
we go on with that? You
yes,
weren't seeing that was a problem and you
yeah,
fixed it so you would not have to task load and breathe off of
yes,
both to keep both of their
correct.
PO2s and the D. Okay. What was the fix and which two rebreathers are you talking about?
Well, I'll take you to the first one that I noticed this on, right? So the first dual rebreather system that I played with was um, the my back mounted Revo, right? Which was a hybrid CCR. That was what a hybrid means is that has a constant mass flow and has a solenoid at the same time. Uh, And then I used the Dive Go on my chest. That was the first dual rebreather system that I used. Number one, the only reason I dive dual CCR, and let's get this straight, right? I do not dive for real purposes. I do not dive dual CCR until I get past the 100 meter range. Why? Because the risk is not worth the reward, right? Me diving two rebreathers increases my chances of something happening. I can't tell you. I can't say it's twofold, threefold, fourfold. I can't tell you that. I can tell you that it's a lot more work, and pro the problems that you have with rebreathers now come in twos. So, what at what point is it to me? Do I say that okay? It's this risk is better if I do it in dual CCR. To me, I think, and then again, this is not in caves, this is wreck diving because that's what I do. I believe the minute that I have to carry more than four cylinders, four 80s, I no longer feel safe because I have too much stuff going on. I got too many bottles. I am too heavy. I'm too big. Um, Too many gases that I need to switch, right? Too many things that if everything goes right, it's okay. But if things go wrong, I have to really think about this. Now, I'm going to think about this by myself. I don't care if I'm diving with somebody else. You understand? I can't rely on my partner. Why? I'm going to tell you the 100% honest. If it's dangerous for me to dive to 400 feet and there's two of you, it's dangerous for him as well. What if he dies? I got to get out of the water. So I need to be able to take care of myself, right? So I feel that more than four cylinders for me is just too much to deal with. It really is. Too many gases to switch, too many accidents can happen, too many regulators that I can grab at the wrong time if I start panicking because something else happened. And what is that something else? I get hurt, physically hurt. I get bit by something. I get physically hurt. I'm bleeding. Let's say I didn't get a heart attack, but I'm having chest problems. Something that puts massive stress on you. That's considered an emergency. That now I got to deal with pain, and now you're going to tell me that I have to think about that my 3036 is MOD is at 182 feet. So 100, that stuff is when I see there's a problem. So for me, it's four cylinders, sometimes even less. Because if I have a scooter, I only want to take three. It's just one of those things. So when I see that I have too many things going on, I go dual rebreather. Why? Because dual rebreather, I carry the rebreathers, and then all the gas that I carry is what I call gas for sanity breaths, and to cure to me the number one danger and killer in dual rebreather, which is hypercapnia, which is for people that don't dive, that is hyperventilation. That will kill
From
you
from CO2, from
from
carbon
CO
dioxide.
from carbon dioxide. So I carry an open circuit gas. I usually carry to about 300 feet or 100 meters. I'll carry one cylinder with a bottom gas for sanity breaths or to bail out in between switching rebreathers in the event I have hypercapnia, right? And that can happen from overworking, that can happen from a rebreather not working for whatever reason. Now, if I go deeper than 100 meters, now I carry two bottles, and that's as much as I carry. I carry only two bottles, two gases, nothing else, right? I don't carry bailout gas. I know, again, I've gotten beat over the head and people's giving their opinion on this. You should still carry open circuit bailout. I'm not doing that, right? And I'm not going to carry proper open circuit bailout on top of two rebreathers. Because now I didn't double my problem. I quadrupled it. Now I have two rebreathers and all these damn bottles. I'm not doing this. So that's not the way I dive dual rebreathers. Some people do. A lot of the people who know how to dive dual CCRs and that have done it for many, many and hundreds of dives, they don't agree with that way of thinking. People that don't understand it or are just starting run into the same issue that I did. You don't know what you don't know, and they start commenting on things that they haven't encountered or had problems with. Because I had CO2 breakthrough on a dual CCR. It's happened. Not bad, but it's happened. So that's kind of
It's a
what
terrible feeling.
it is. Horrible, horrible feeling.
It really
So that
is.
that's what I do. So for me, that's when I decide to do this whole dual CCR, the dual CCR thing. So when I decide to do this, I had to modify my Revo. I modified it because I'm going deep. The Revo, the way it is at HCCR is, and again, people can disagree with me on this, is limited again, just like an MCCR, to 100 meters. Why? Because constant mass flow ends. I no longer can flow oxygen to my solenoid or to my constant mass flow. People say, oh yeah, you can plug in. That hole I can plug in just gave me something else to worry about. So for me, that is out of the question. I don't want to add more problems deep. I want to take away tasks deep. Now I want to add them. So me having to plug something in, it already is like, that's not working. How do I fix this? So I turned my Revo into a full electronic CCR. Now I have one problem, and is if my solenoid breaks. Okay, I'm telling you exactly what I did to modify it. A lot of people ask, and I kind of refrain from saying this, but I'll tell you here. Then I fixed it. Then my only problem now is my solenoid breaking. Okay, either open or closed. So what did I do? I added a needle valve from my GBM to my Revo, and I put a way of shutting off the solenoid to the Revo, and I can run it as a needle valve. So if my solenoid sticks open or breaks, I could literally bypass it, and now I can run my Revo as a MCCR on a needle valve, and that can go as deep as I want. So that was my, and again, I did a lot of other modifications to wiring and to monitoring, because I want to monitor many things, because again, this to me was my primary rebreather. So I had to be able to shut off ADVs that you can't do on the stock unit. I gotta monitor different different computers. I had a wireless computer on my HUD. I had a wired computer on here, so I had to do stuff to that. That's what I did. I went with the Go. Why? Because it's simple. It's a simple unit. There's no electronics to break. There's no solenoids to break. There's nothing. And that's what I started diving dual CCR first with. It just so happens that I was lucky enough, and I say lucky because I didn't do it backwards and chose something else first. The Go, the way Mike Young designed it, and the way that it injects the
Oxygen.
actual gas, not even the
Mhm.
oxygen, just dill as well, into the
Mhm.
canister is extremely efficient without me being on the loop. Happened by accident. I didn't like, oh, you know what? I calculate. No, I'm telling you the truth. It was by accident. I found out that this is amazing. How? Before I went dual CCR, guess what I was diving? I dove open circuit doubles with a rebreather that I'm not breathing on. And I did several dives to 100 feet, 200 feet, 250 feet with open circuit doubles and my rebreather, because to see how this rebreather works with me not breathing on it. And I found out that the Go is an incredibly good rebreather as a standby rebreather, because I can literally increase or decrease my PO2 without being on the loop. And
Mhm.
all I literally do is that I can inject O2 or DIL and then tilt to my right, which is the inhale counter lung. And all I literally, it's like pumping up an artificial lung. I literally pump it a couple of times, the flow goes in reverse, bypasses the mushroom valves, and my
Mhm.
PO2 goes up or down. After the PO2 goes to where I want it, I go to the other side and I have a pull dump that I put on, and I literally dump my counter lungs. And now I have minimal loop volume and my PO2 where I want it.
Wow.
That's what I found this out by doing these dives, and it was amazing. But then I ran into another problem that, for example, Richard Harris and a lot of other people that I learned from them, is the decompression.
Mhm.
I have to have a rebreather that I can that if it breaks, I'm gonna bail out to. But since now this rebreather is not diving the same partial pressure, my decompression is off, because that one is might be lower, might be higher. It's not exactly the same. So now I'm like, okay, maybe I'm going to try an ECCR that can hold my PO2 just like my back mount ECCR. And I went through a couple of those. I ended up using the Choptima and or the chest mounted Optima as my uh, chest mounted rebreather. Um, I changed a few minor things, again, modified it, but I changed a few minor things to inject the gas. Now that I know how the Go worked, I was able to modify other things to make other rebreathers do what the Go did. So I changed ADVs, I changed overpressure valves, and I made the Choptima do what I wanted, be off loop and be able to increase or decrease the PO2 automatically. So I had an ADV just like on the Go that was so sensitive that as I descend, it would ingest dill by itself without me being on it. So that solved the counterlungs imploding problem. And then the ECCR maintained what's it called, because where it injected and maintained the PO2. So it was great. As I said at 1.2, it will maintain 1.2. That worked until it didn't. And when did that happen? At a 400-foot dive. I was out testing. I was out actually open water. I was in I was doing. I went to the area of a wreck called the Bulk Trader, and I wanted a little. I went out maybe 50, 60 feet further east, get deeper water. I went down there, and I was down at the bottom just doing some checks, and then I was going to come up, and I was on my Revo, and the Choptima solenoid just opened up, and my PO2 went from 1.2 to over 3.5 in seconds.
Wow.
Literally
It
seconds.
would at that depth.
And it opened up not because of the failure of the rebreather, not because of something wrong with the way the chopped them or the parts that they were doing. I tell you why it failed. It was because I was not taking care, and this is something that I was not taking care of cleaning every little part of that rebreather correctly. I looked at the solenoid afterwards to see what happened before I made it work again under a 10 power microscope, and I found salt crystals in the needle valve. So
Oh,
the salt crystals was just enough to crack open the needle valve with the pressure of the oxygen behind it. It opened it up, and once it opened up, it took that seconds to spike it. That's all it did.
which
So
for those that may not understand how
yeah.
seriously deadly that is, that spiking of a PO2 could throw you into a convulsion very
Oh
quickly
yeah.
at that depth. I
Yeah.
don't know if at the 3.0, I think is what you said, I'd probably be
Yeah.
convulsing.
No, yeah. So luckily, I was not breathing that rebreather. I
Yeah.
wasn't on it. But I did do the emergency procedures I practiced. I shut off my O2 and then I shut the oxygen off. And that's what I did. And I then, again, nothing was wrong with my bailout rebreather. And I just came and decode on my bailout, on my origin, on the Revo, on the extraditional rebreather. So at that point, and again, the progression to this was I did about 15 dives on this setup and my decompression computers matched within a minute of each other. So I'm like, I solved the problem. This is amazing. But I encountered this problem. And I'm like, yeah, this ain't gonna work. I don't want a ECCR as my bailout rebreather. I don't want it because I want to be able to control this. I want to be able to control what that bailout rebreather does. So I went back to the Go and I modified several things on the Go with again some with help of several Mike Young, the help of other people. I spoke to Akam that he dove his rebreather very deep and stuff that people that and I modified it to be able to go to the deepest dive that I've done on the Go at this point is 470 feet, and I modified my Go Plus right to that and it worked amazing. And I dove that rebreather setup, my Revo on that for a very, very long time. A lot of the dives, because I can increase and decrease, I matched my PO2s and I didn't use any gas. I literally had a fully functional bailout rebreather with all the oxygen and everything else intact, and my computer is decompressed all at the same time with no issues. So that system worked for me, and it was wonderful. And I dove for a long time until just recently I ended up switching to what I think probably is my latest or last version, which is I'm using Mike Young's new rebreather, the Stingray, and a chest CCR, whether it's the Go, whether it's the GBM, whether it's my Halcyon, a chest CCR. Why? Because to me, the chest CCRs breathe the best. I love the way they breathe. The worker breathing on the Go, the worker breathing on the GBM, on the all for most part, all chest mounted rebreathers breathe amazing. So That's what I want to breathe as a primary. And the way that Mike Young designed the Stingray with, and it's pretty much has the same worker breathing as the Go. So I just solved my problem with an expedition grade rebreather as my bailout now, a rebreather that I can dive to excess of 500 feet, which I've done already. That is amazing. And I added a needle valve from GBM to be able to control it and go that deep and keep my workload down. And now I dive it that way, and that's what I dove in Egypt, and it worked out great. I had a bailout, and it worked. My plan worked out amazing on that. So that's kind of what I do. I do on the dual CCR setup. I have literally just purchased the Liberty side mount, and like 2 days ago, just because I want to try it. A lot of people in Europe are diving the Liberty. The technology in the Liberty, even though it's an ECCR, you can actually shut off and make it and shut off everything and make it a manual CCR until you need it. So I'm going to try that just to see.
The question that, with all of that incredible explanation, which is remarkable, the things you've in fact innovated and changed on rebreathers from the manufacturer are remarkable. And I would say that I don't think the word most is not even appropriate. 99.999% of divers, I don't think, are capable of thinking that out and doing that. Should what should people, based on what you know, who, if they say to you, well, I want to do what you're doing, what do you tell them? What do you say now? Because we're violating.
Yeah.
I like this conversation because I like that you and we've always done this. We just shoot honest, whether it's the
Mhm.
things people want to hear or not. We are, by doing these modifications for those listening, you don't have to type in the comments. You just voided warranties. You went
Everything,
against all of
100%.
the manual that tell you don't modify the rebreathers. You're violating all these rules within a basic rebreather class. It is. If you read a manual,
Yep.
I bet you, from anybody's class. So what do you say about that to other people, to the public, to people that want to emulate it with you?
I I get
Because
yeah.
we got to address the elephant in the room.
Yeah, I get call, I just got called yesterday by a friend that I met, with that actually Doug was teaching, Normoxic 2, and is kind of going that route and wants to do this. And I told him, I said, and I just kind of way I let him. I'm like, first of all, you need to learn the basics and what's going on with dual rebreathers. I said, there's a lot of things out there. I said, I led them to my channel I did 3 series on dual rebreathers. I said, go learn that and then see what you think you want to do. You can call me anytime. I said, I'm not going to tell you what system you're going to use or how to do it or how to dive it. I said, you need to do it on your own. And he's been doing this now for probably about, I think, a good 6 months. He calls me every once in a while. Hey, I run into this issue. Have you run into this before? And he talks to other people. He's very good friends with Ed Sorensen. He's done a lot of training with him, and Ed helps him out. Ed's a plethora of world of plethora of knowledge. I saw his videos on dual CCR probably dozens of times, 2, 3 times, just to listen to every single little thing because he ran into some issues as well with things. So, and that's kind of how I designed some of these ADV things or what I want in ADV because of he actually breathed a Liberty that flooded on him in a cave, and I adopted his way of bailing out. And it's instead of breathing in first, you breathe out because you can hear gurgling. So, and that's what he does now, and I that's what I do when I switch loops. So I told him, I'm like, and you need to learn all this stuff, and call me if you have any issues, and I'll help you out and mentor you and tell you, hey, this is what worked for me, but try it on your own. Dual CCR stuff or diving, you're not only voiding warranty, 100%, but you're also diving past your certification limits.
Sure.
I just recently got my CCR Expedition Trimix certificate, but from Joe Deturi, which is pretty. I think that it's kind of like in the industry, right? I think GUE and I think just INTD are the only two that offer a certification to 400 feet. And I just got it. I didn't need it. I didn't want it. It wasn't something I went to do it. He was like, hey, might as well do it since we're doing this. The only reason I did the training is I want to learn deep diving science. Always learning, right? So again, I try to learn from everybody. Joe is a world-renowned hyperbaric medicine in hyperbaric medicine. He's very well known in this industry. You
It's
know,
Joe
is
Joe DeTurri you're talking about.
Joe, yes, Joe Deturi, you know, and
Dr. Joe DeTurri.
Dr. Joe Deturi, Dr. Deep Sea, you know, he's been a Navy diver, dove to 2,000 feet in a pressure suit, and highly, you know, highly experienced technical diver. You know, I think he was, yeah, I think he even owned INTD for a little while. Again, very knowledgeable, and the diving was awesome. We had, but what I actually got more out of him during the training was the talks, the stuff that I can't learn from a book. I'm not a doctor. I'm not. I'm not an anesthesiologist like Richard Harris is. I'm not you know, interventional cardiologist like, you know, like Dr. Ebersol is, or you know, I'm not you know, a hyperbaric you know, specialist and emergency room technician like my good friend and the person, you know, our dive medical and safety officer on the Britannic expedition, George Borgueno. I'm not them. I'm not a doctor. I'm a pilot. So I don't know physiology. So I have to learn it. I got to learn from these people how things work, and that's the stuff that I learned from Joe during that time. And I got the certification, but the certification doesn't mean anything, right? Because I'm still diving past that limit, right? I'm still diving past it. So you're diving past your certification limits. You're modifying rebreathers. At this point, you're taking this responsibility on yourself. That's
Yeah.
what you do. Now, I will be very clear. I don't take the risks. What do I mean I don't take the risks? Why is George or Dr. Borgueno here in Greece with us? George, we've become very good friends. I consider him a brother. You know, I speak to him almost on a daily basis. He has been the person that I go to for medical things when I do something. Every time I go and want to do something new, is like, is there anything medically that I'm going to run into diving like this? Is there anything that I need to check on myself? Is there some kind of syndrome that exists in Papua New Guinea that somebody happened to have that could possibly happen at that depth? Have you heard about this? And obviously he's a very knowledgeable doctor. I speak to Doug as well quite a bit, and now, you know, we've become close friends with Joe. I'll talk to Joe. I run stuff through them, and what could affect me. So anytime I do something as part of my planning process, before I do something, I want to know medically, what do I need to know about this? You know, there's stuff about CO2. There's CO2 retention and hypercapnia that I had no idea about. That there's diseases that make you more susceptible to CO2 that I don't know if I have, that I don't know if depth will make me have, but you need to be aware of this. And this is stuff that George talks to me about. So anytime, and it's funny because anytime I do something, the first person I call is George. I speak to him for days, hours. I roll by, and then after that, then I go into my own processing about gases planning and you know, the actual the all the planning portion of the dive itself, you know, when it comes down to that, and so forth, emergency contingencies for the dive, and I kind of go in that order. But the first person I go to is a doctor. I said this to somebody online when they were criticizing me about this dive that I just did to 500 plus feet, and I told them it's not a coincidence that most of the very experienced divers that have dove to 6, 7, 800 feet are doctors.
Yeah. True. That's
It's
right.
not it's not a coincidence, right? I can, and I'll say this, and I go back. I can go back to the flying aspect. I always say this: I can teach a monkey how to fly. I taught my, and you know, my son was
Oh, I
7,
can
I think.
learn. In other
Oh
words, for
yeah,
the
yeah.
community, I think I got
I
maybe
I
Gus.
can.
No, that's
Yeah.
debatable.
I actually I taught my son how to land an airplane when he was 8 years old on a seaplane. Because why? Because he's really good at video games. And I told him, just follow these things. And he landed a seaplane. I was on the controls with him and I helped, and he landed it. But that doesn't mean he's a pilot, right? Well, it's the same thing. You could be the most amazing diver in the world. You could have the best trim, the best back kick, the best everything. And if you don't know the medical aspect of diving, because technical diving, it's in the title, it's technical. That's first. I will take you to a very close friend of mine, and I call him a deep diving expert because he is one of the foregoing deep diving guys in the world. Is Isa Mohammed out of in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt,
It's great. It's great.
and he is probably one of the. And I was with him for almost about 5 days when he was teaching a trimix class, open circuit trimix class. There's a lady that came in from Asia. So think about it. She traveled all the way from Asia to Egypt to do a class. She never got in the water. Never.
Wow.
Why? Because she did not pass the classroom. He does not. If you don't understand how to manually calculate helium, oxygen densities, what's it called? Learning about CO2s, manually planning bailout, all this stuff that he teaches, you're not even getting in the water. Forget about
Amazing.
diving. He won't do it. What did he do? Gave her back the money, said, "Come back later if you want to. I'm sorry." That's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? Why? Technical diving is no forgiveness. You screw up, you die. That's kind of how it is. So the portions of these kind of dives, and it's not just the 500-foot dives, the 100-meter dives can kill you just as easy, or the 200-meter dive. Anytime you start getting into the serious decompression stuff, or trimix diving, there's stuff you need to know. And the deeper you go, the more issues you have. So it's medical doctors are the why these people are the ones that are mostly these extremely deep divers. I mean, on the I believe the last expedition that Dr. Harris did, he had Simon Mitchell with him. He had literally everybody on his team was like a world-renowned doctor, like very experienced doctors. So it's not coincidence. These people are literally like physicians calculating stuff that I don't know. So that's why these are the first people that I talk to before I do anything, because I am not a doctor. I'm a diver, and I like the technical aspect, and I study it as much as I can. It's almost become an infatuation of mine. Anything that I can read about diving medicine, hyperbarics, and everything else, I do. I literally I was gonna buy a hyperbaric chamber, a portable hyperbaric chamber to bring to the Britannic. And we ended up finding having
How deep is the Britannic, by the way?
yeah. So the Britannic's 400 feet, and I was at the beginning planning stages of this, and I spoke to
Britannic. Sorry, I
yeah on the
mispronounced
Britannic.
it.
Yeah. I talked to Giannis, the owner of Kia Divers, and I again learned about where's the closest hyperbaric chamber, emergency protocols. What happens if somebody gets bent? Because I plan for the worst. I want to, one of the things here, aside from the difficulty level of diving or deep diving that we're doing, the water is cold. It's 55 degrees at the bottom. The hottest it gets is 61 degrees today. So we're doing 3-hour dives in 60-degree water. If you're not prepared, you can get hypothermia. Also, your
Yep.
decompression and bubbling goes and actually gets adjusted because of this. So you can, getting bent is fairly easy if you don't do things correctly. So my first thing was like, where's the closest hyperbaric chamber? What could we do? And the closest one's Athens. Again, I'm fortunate enough that for me, I'll spend whatever money I need to do what I need to do. I was going to go buy. I spoke to Mike Young. I spoke to, Joe Deturi. I spoke to these people that know that know this, and I'm like, I want to buy a portable hyperbaric chamber, a real one that can help me out, and that get flown on a helicopter while taking me somewhere else to save somebody's life for my team if anything happens. And I was about to spend $90,000 on buying a hyperbaric chamber, and I already had George Borgueno. I had Dr. Borgueno. I had already had him set up to do training in December on it and everything else. And then we ended up coming up with an alternative, an alternative to doing that was going to be better and a little safer on it. So, or a little quicker. So we had helicopters on standby. I also had speedboats that can take you to Athens in the event of that happening. So that kind of stuff. There's a lot of preparatory things when you start doing dives like this, especially in remote areas.
With all of this said, just to kind of, we're starting to bring it near the end because we covered so much
Yeah.
great stuff. Where do you draw the line? Where in your mind, just think about this question for a second.
Mhm.
What's the depth limit? Where are you going to say the equipment that I've modified, that I feel comfortable with all the knowledge I've gained, this is it. And why? Why is it that spot?
Yeah.
If you've even
So
gotten there yet.
I I have to tell you that when I got out of the water after I did my 500 plus foot dive, I called um, a couple of people, right? Number one, I believe it or not, the first person I called is George, of course. He was very worried when I came in, when we got in the water and did this. And I also text Doug Ebersol, and I'm like, I think that's it. This is it, right? And the reason I say this is it was more because, again, I'm not diving just to dive. I want to go somewhere to see something, to do something. Um, and the risk factors when you start getting into the 600, 700, 800 feet is extremely, it's not linear, it's exponential of things that can happen to you physically. Um, I'm not a 20-year-old Navy SEAL. Dr. Deturio, Dr. Deepsea, right? He used to lock out of a sub at 2.8 PO2, you know, and that's a normal thing for him. That's not me. I'm 48 years old. I have gotten a lot better in terms of my health. I purposely, believe it or not, I lost about 60 pounds. I literally do exercise. Dive and everything else. I got healthier just because of the deep diving. For that reason, I because I wanted to have the best chances of things working out. And things start getting complicated past the 500-600 foot range. Something called HPNS, that stuff that Dr. Harris ran into, the high pressure nervous
Shaking.
syndrome, which is kind of like you start getting tremors, just like if you had Parkinson's, stuff like this starts to happen. I've been fortunate enough that I haven't felt that yet, but it could happen at any time. You don't know when or what it could happen. I do everything possible not for it not to happen. There's a lot of little tricks that we do before deep diving that I've learned from several people, not just one person. I spoke to several, like I would say dozens of people that do these kind of dives on a regular basis. Hey, what do you do before a deep dive? What do you eat? What do you do? So for me, before a deep dive, a week before, I start helium loading. So I start off with about a 150-foot dive, then I do 180, 200, 250, 300. I literally do, for me, before I go travel, if I'm going to do one of these dives, I'm literally living at Eagle's Nest. To me, it's my playground. I go there, I go into the pit often, and it's one of the places I do because to me, it's a controlled environment and it's deep. I go there just to load up on high helium. Some people say it doesn't work. Other people say they live by it. I can tell you so far, it's worked for me. I helium load before I do my deep dives because, again, I don't breathe helium on a normal basis. So all of a sudden, me going from diving, breathing at the surface, just air, to breathing at 400 or 500 feet, a mixture of 780 or 785, which is
Just
7%
so that,
oxygen,
there you go.
85% helium. I'm breathing 85% helium. As inert that it can be, I'm pretty sure, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm pretty sure it does something to you, right? I mean, if not, God would have made helium in the air,
Right.
right? It doesn't work that way. So I helium load and my body gets used to helium. So I try to load my body up on helium. What do I do the days coming up to the dive? I hyperhydrate. Everything that I drink has electrolytes in it. I eat what's it called, antioxidant foods, to a lot of foods that have antioxidants in them. What's it called, so it could help me on gas and off gas better. Right before the morning of my dive, I eat black dark chocolate. I have baby aspirin. This is stuff that I've taken from people that I've learned. Before my dive, I'm eating a dark chocolate bar and I pop a baby aspirin, right? Before I do a deep dive, right? And nothing's happened to me, knock on wood. I haven't, I'm glad to say I haven't gotten bent, I haven't gotten hurt. And it's been working. So I'm gonna keep on doing it. Some people say, oh, that doesn't work. I eat bananas like usually every single why for potassium. Well, so my potassium levels could be high so I don't cramp up. You know, we literally, it's funny. If you look at the kitchen right now here, we got at least 2 dozen bananas here. Why? Because Greg does the same thing. He eats it the first thing in the morning. We eat 2 bananas before we go. And a bottle of water before
Me
we go
too.
out diving.
I feel
So
so much better when I dive and
yeah,
do that with bananas.
you know, you know,
So,
stuff
so,
like this.
so, so to summarize, did you say, do you think that depth limit where you've now drawn the line is what depth?
I would say again, I'm planning, and I hate to say planning because I am planning a deep dive for next year in February, back in Roatan for a specific reason. Again, I'm not diving for depth. I'm going there for a specific reason that I really um, don't want to discuss. I guess at the moment you'll know after I do the dive, but it's going to be probably to around 650, maybe 680 feet, where we we found something with the submarine that I ended up renting on the last dive that we found where I was. So gonna go back down and do that. Maybe we might do it. This is just a planning process. And again, just started thinking about things. Am I going to do it? I don't know. I might not. I might decide the last minute, no, I just don't want to take that risk, right? Because a lot of stuff now comes into play. What flashlights do I use? What's it called? What computers am I going to use? All kinds of stuff, things that break. All flashlights are 150-meter rated. What flash am I going to use that deep? So these are things that I have to think about. So for me right now, I probably have to say 600 is probably my deepest dive that I would like to do right now. That I can say, hey, am I going to do another 600-foot dive? That's about it, 600 feet. I'll do 120 or 400-meter dive, 400-foot dives. Because there's a lot of wrecks. I'm doing a 410-foot dive in the beginning of June in Malta. I'm going down to a World War II submarine that's out there that I couldn't go down to the last trip I did. So yeah, that I'm going to do. So that kind of depths I'm going to do over and over again. The deep dives, no, it's something that has to be planned. It's got to be. I got to look at myself, do my own check to make sure I'm okay to do it, because you only get one chance at it, right? Like they say, you could do everything once. So I can say I want to do this, but it might not happen. So that's kind of where it is. There's a lot that comes to it to plan for a dive like that.
Well, this is pretty fascinating. What I really appreciate is just it's a very, very honest conversation. It really is. It's just great that you are honest about all the things we discussed. I don't need to repeat
Yeah.
it for those that have watched it, understand what I'm saying. And hopefully they learned a lot as well. First of all, where can they follow your adventures? Let's say that. And then I
Yeah.
want you to, I want you to give one final statement of something you want to just share with the audience about deep technical diving from your own
Yeah.
experience, from the journey to, if they want to get into this 100-meter or deeper stuff, a final summary. Here's what I've been through. Here's what I would recommend. So first, where can they learn more about you?
Well, first of all, I have a YouTube channel, and it's called Senior Scuba. So I go on there and I post all my dives that I do. I go on there and post all my dives, and also do a lot of I do product review of different rebreathers and different things. I do talk about topics like this. My gas planning, how I calculate things. I do stuff on there, and I'm honest about it. I make mistakes. I'm not. I'm the first one to tell you I make mistakes. Sometimes I things happen and I'm like, okay, this didn't work, and I will be honest about it. It didn't work. I was very public about. I wouldn't say a mistake that I did, and that was something that happened on the last dive, and it went viral everywhere. But I can tell you, I took full responsibility for it because, again, it was my choice. This is something I did. Nobody forced me to do it. This is something that I did. So they can follow me there. I'm on YouTube on Senior Scuba, or you can go to www.seniorscuba.com, SENOR scuba.com, or you can find me on any of the agencies as an instructor, TDI, Dive Talk, or INTD. I'm there. They have my contact info there. And the last thing that always sticks out in my head that I learned from Doug Ebersol the first day when he taught me how to dive rebreather the first day is that if you're going to dive rebreathers, right, there's the three things that you always should know, right? Number one, always know your PO2. And the number two was don't be cheap. And that always sticks in my head. And the don't be cheap is the thing that I really have to harp on, right? Deep technical diving is not cheap at all. So far since January, every expedition that I've taken has been in the tens of thousands of dollars for me to do, to do correctly. You can do it differently, but I mean correctly. In Egypt, for example, I chartered a liveaboard for myself, the whole boat. It was just me and Isa on a liveaboard for the week that we were diving, and I had a staff about 8 people on there that were there just to help us dive, and dozens of tanks and dozens of things. In Roatan, give you for example, if you look on my channel, I chartered a submarine. It's like to go scope out where I was going to dive. It
Oh,
just so happened, and we were talking, and I wasn't planning on it, but when I got there, and all of a sudden we were diving that one day, and somebody brought up, oh, the captain that drove Ocean Gate, one of the initial guys that went down to the Titanic, he has a submarine here. I'm like, submarine? I want it. Let's do it. And I went down to 1,000 feet in the sub, and we scoped out the exact location where I was going to be diving the next day with Joe down to 430 feet. It was great. That wasn't cheap. But again, now I wasn't just descending into somewhere I never been before. I knew, oh, the rock is here. Don't go here because there's fishing line here. Stuff like this. I don't spare money whatsoever with this at all. Just like Dr. Harris when he goes to the Pierce Resurgence, helicopters, habitats. It's expensive. It's not cheap. I'm at the Britannic. I mean, we're here. We have chase boats. We have there's support divers. I got a doctor here. This isn't people don't come here on their because just they're being nice. You gotta and that kind of stuff. So it's one of these things. If you're gonna do this kind of stuff and you're gonna venture into this, you need to do it correctly, or you're putting your own life at risk. So if you can't um, go and actually give your all yourself to learn emergency stuff, practice this, and live what you're doing, and unfortunately also have the resources to pay for this stuff, it's probably not the thing to do for you. Something's going to go wrong. Murphy's going to bite you, and it's going to happen, right? I can tell you that I was in Truck Lagoon in January, and I will tell you right there, I travel everywhere with at least 2 rebreathers, and one of my goes broke. Somebody literally dropped my go and broke my rebreather. No, they didn't tell me. I noticed it right before I got in the water. They broke my rebreather, and I had another one. Right? I just traveled halfway around the world. I went, okay, well, shit. Excuse me. Go to the room, pick up the other rebreather I had, and I do. So if you're gonna play, you need to pay. It's one of those things. And if you don't, and if you want to not do it, I guess without getting into the bad words on this, if you're gonna do it half, don't do it. You're gonna hurt yourself. It's gonna happen. That's anything I can tell people. It's if you're not giving it your 110% and dedicating time and knowledge and effort to do something, don't do it. So not to extend this more, a lot of people are saying you've done so much in such a short time. The amount of time I literally, it's like, and people, my family, my coworkers, my friends tell me, they're like, do you work still? I own my own company. I own a very large aircraft charter management company. Yeah, I work. I still fly. But to me, for the last 2 years, diving has been my full-time job. Literally has been my
definitely.
full-time. And I teach not because I want to go and make extra money. No, I teach because it helps me learn the stuff that I'm teaching better for myself. And at the same time, I can help the next generation of people learn and do more stuff and hopefully pass on what I know. And I literally dedicated what everything that I do to diving so far. Am I going to wake up one day and say, you know what, it's over, and I'm not gonna dive 3, 4 times a week and travel every single month somewhere exotic around the world to go dive a new wreck? Maybe. I've thought about it. Right now, no. Right now, I'm full ahead. I have dives planned all through December, to
Amazing.
everything's planned out. So that's kind of what I'm doing. When I stop, I'm going to stop. So
Thank you so much for this. And I think you know I love you. I really do. I don't know, the connection just feels great.
yeah,
And you were so open and honest with me. And I'm honored for that, really, but that you were willing to share that with me and our viewers. And I admire you. I worry. All the thing, of the norm.
thank you.
Again, I'm in the unknown as well, right? I'm one of the people that you don't
Mhm.
know what you don't know.
Yeah,
The summary of all of this is it's extreme. It's just beyond technical. You're in new world stuff, stuff that
yeah,
only, frankly, some things only you've done. And fascinating. So dive
yeah.
safe. Have a great dive. I know you have this Britannic dive coming up. I don't know if it's
Yep.
tomorrow or the next day after this interview.
Yeah. Yeah, we're diving Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday on Britannic, and then they're actually taking us to I wouldn't say secret, but a very unexplored German airplane called the Junker that's actually here, and it's in one piece, unlike a lot of these airplanes here in Kia that we're going to go dive as well. But yeah, Britannic is a big deal.
Definitely
One of
is.
the yeah.
You
So
will have already done it by the time this is edited and aired,
yeah,
but they can know I'm literally talking to you at the place where you're on an
I am.
expedition right now.
It is.
And it's very late, and you did this for us.
Yeah.
So thank you, my friend. I can't wait to
Thank
see you
you.
soon. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.